Greetings. I'm Josh Soria, a founding partner and lead advisor at Encompass Financial Planning, where we serve our community through holistic wealth management and tax management simplified. Today, we're going to talk about sequence of returns risks and how this can be one of the single most detrimental risks that a soon-to-be retiree or retiree faces. Now, retirees are caught between the conundrum of making money on their money so they don't run out, but on the flip side, they also don't want to be exposed to risk of losing their money, which puts them at risk for running out of money. So what is a retiree supposed to do? Last week, we talked about the money cycle and how it's important to preserve a portion of our assets to prevent us from experiencing sequence of returns risk, which is essentially taking withdrawals on our accounts when our investments are down. And we all know that the stock market goes up and down. So let's dive into sequence of returns risk and take a look at the math behind it, so we can really understand why it's important to preserve a portion of our assets to shield them from the risk of the market going down at the wrong time. Let's take a look at this hypothetical illustration of Miss Happy and Mr. Unhappy, and how their portfolios unfold under these two hypothetical but insightful illustrations. Now on this slide, we see that they both have an initial deposit of $100,000, they have an average return of 6%, and they aren't taking any withdrawals. Now what's different about the scenarios is the order in which they receive returns. Now it's important to note that this order is not a variable that we have control over. We see that Miss Happy has very positive returns early on and very negative returns later in the 10-year cycle. Mr. Unhappy has it flipped, where he has very negative returns early on, followed by very positive returns at the end of the 10-year cycle. Now, when we're not taking distributions, both people wound up with about $154,000. Now, when we look at the scenario where the clients are taking distributions from their assets, in this slide, we see that they're taking $6,000 annual withdrawals. Everything else remains the same. The order and the sequence that they receive returns are identical to the previous slide. And we see at the end of the 10-year period that Miss Happy still has about $100,000 left after taking distributions for 10 years. Whereas Mr. Unhappy, he only has $40,000 and is in a much more negative situation. And this was all due to a variable that these two people do not have control over. So what we're going to talk about next is how we can exhibit some control over this variable that we don't really have much control over. Now we see how, from this example, how sequence of returns risk can be very detrimental to a retiree. Now let's talk for a moment about how many investment advisors and portfolio managers approach investing retirees' assets. And we'll compare this to how Encompass Financial Planning helps our clients create a more secure and clear picture for their financial future. The result that we see is that many investment advisors simply do a risk and volatility analysis and put all of the client's assets into one volatility class, failing to determine what the client's time horizon is on taking distributions from their assets. This can result in retirees being allocated too aggressively for the assets that they plan to take distributions from. People who retired in 2008 and used this strategy lost very large sums of money, and many were never able to recover. Now at Encompass Financial Planning, we use a more holistic approach to wealth management, relying on the 5 pillars of holistic wealth management. One of the main tools we use to accomplish this is the bucket plan best interest process. Now this is a tool that helps us exert control over an area where we struggle to find control. Simply put, the bucket plan time segments assets based on purpose and time horizon of the assets. This allows us to create a more conservative allocation for assets that we will be taking distributions from now or in the near future. We call this buying a time horizon. Then we work with our clients to determine what kind of return and risk profile they're willing to accept for assets that they do not need to access for the next 10 or more years. We find that this process creates a much more stable and secure outlook for our clients, providing them more peace of mind because they're able to exert some control over the order and sequence of returns that we receive. Now, in our next video, we'll talk in more detail about the individual buckets as well as the bucket plan best interest process. If you or someone you know can benefit from the services that we offer, please click the link below to schedule a complimentary 20-minute consultation. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.